Labour under Keir Starmer has been pretty soft on the super rich. But one place where they might feel the pinch is in education. And that's because Labour have pledged to introduce VAT on fees for private schools. The head of Mayfield School for Girls, a private school, called into LBC to explain his fears if the policy goes ahead. And get your tissues ready, because this is a real sob story.
I would honestly say that the majority of parents are really struggling to pay the fees. And in my 27 years as a head, we always made it possible for people who were struggling to have some kind of bursary or scholarship if their children really would benefit from an education at the school and the school would benefit from their presence. So 20% would be absolutely crucial. And I think that the majority of smaller, less well-known private schools would actually have to close or join the state sector. I mean, that's another option. But I think it would finish off all but the most famous headline schools, the Etons, Harrows, etc., which have enormous endowments. But the smaller schools don't, and I think they would close.
This is where the debate gets a little bit odd, isn't it? Because obviously it's a vote winner. If only 7% of people, and largely they've got money, who send their children to independent sector, if it's only 7%, the 93% are going, well, who cares? So, to have a proper debate about this is sort of difficult, because if you say private or independent to somebody who doesn't have the means to send them there, they're thinking Eton, they're thinking top hat and tails and a bunch of snobs and etc. It's that's the problem. That's where the debate goes too quickly, doesn't it?
Exactly. And to be honest, I don't even think the Conservative government are prepared to fight too hard on this one, because again, there are no votes in it for them. So I'm not optimistic about this. I think that it would be an easy win, a vote winner for Labour, but I think the consequences would be dire, because of course, they would actually then have to provide school places for the 400,000 or 500,000 children who were no longer going to private schools. So there would have to be a lot of school building, which would take time.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know how they would square that circle. I suspect there would be an interim phase where they put pressure on independent schools, private schools to take children from state schools, to provide their facilities more openly to people from state schools, to consider mergers and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's going to happen full stop in the next 5, 10, 15 years. But I think, there is an inevitability about it.
Spent that clip looking up how I could buy a very, very tiny violin. People think that we're like Eton, or the we're like Winchester. No, we're just a humble, ordinary private school. It's not easy for us. We might be the top 7% of people when it comes to income, wealth, and privilege, but that doesn't mean you can't bunch us up with the top 1%. No. That would be almost prejudiced, right? I looked up how much the school cost that he's the head teacher for. So boarding fees, so you can be a boarder there, 12,000 a term. So if there's 3 terms, that'd be £36,000 a year. Day fees, so if you don't board, £8,000 a term, so £24,000 a year. So this is not, it's just hard-working, lower middle class who are trying to get their kids ahead. No, you're going to have to be relatively wealthy to send your kids there. So if, lo and behold, those kids have to go to state school, like the rest of us, like 93% of the country, I do not care. I do not care. Actually, I think it would be an actively good thing, right? Because he's talking there about, that means you might have to put some extra money into the state sector. What it means to have sort of integrated education is that you have lots of different classes together. Classes as in, social backgrounds, not classroom classes. And that, I think, probably makes it easier to teach, right? Because kids come with a lot of social capital. If you have a school where everyone there is from a poor background, where the parents didn't go to university, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, there are a lot of good schools that make the kids achieve anyway, but it's easier if you've got a lot of social capital in that school for the kids to succeed. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing if these schools close down and people have to use normal schools. Also, because these are the people who are most likely to have like tax revolts and say, I can't be bothered to pay more tax for education. If their kids went to normal schools and they saw the effect of cuts, then they might be less inclined to vote Conservative at the next election. Right. So I think the idea, we see it with the NHS, the idea that everyone uses the same service tends to be a very good thing. So I don't think it makes much sense to say, oh, well, then, actually private schools do a good thing for everyone else because they take these kids away from state education and we fund them privately so the taxpayer saves some money. No, what you do is you create a situation where you have incredibly privileged people all sort of cordoned off in this space so they can say F you to the rest of society. And then you end up with disproportionately poorer people in state schools, which makes it slightly harder to make that an academically successful school.
It's an interesting issue for myself to talk about, given that I was, full disclaimer here, I was privately educated. So I am reaping the rewards of someone who was privately educated. But look, I think as someone who's from West African heritage, part of the reason my parents sent me to a private school is because, they valued that as an important route for a good life. They place such an importance on receiving a high quality education as people who've come to this country. They want the best for their children. That's perhaps the problem, right? It shouldn't be that we have to pay for, a quote unquote high quality education. It should be available to anyone, no matter their background, no matter their socioeconomic status. So I do find it funny that, these kind of private school headmasters and people on the right who, most of them went to private schools as well. I do find it funny, but there's kind of moral panic about private schools. Oh, where is me? Private schools, are in trouble. We face some big issues. I think actually, no. Only 7% of people in this country, as you mentioned, Michael, attend a private school. Yet so many of these people dominate such important and influential roles in our society. Let's look at our politics. There have been 20 prime ministers who attended Eton. How can one school have such a monopoly on the most important position in this country? That's completely unfair. We look at the media as well. So many journalists, so many people involved in our media who hold the government to account. So many of them attended private schools. So many of them attended, Oxbridge and Cambridge. There is this real pipeline, this kind of old boys club in our society. And it's important that we address it. And I think for Labour, maybe, who is speaking about ending the charitable status of private schools, that's a good first step. But we need to move to a world where private schools no longer need to exist, right? So, we take away the advantages that private schools enjoy. We fund public schools and we make it more attractive to go to a public school because you believe you can receive a high quality of education there. And ultimately, abolishing private schools for me is an incremental thing where we move slowly towards a world where they're no longer necessary and it becomes kind of the natural order of the day to abolish private schools.
I don't want to pry too much into sort of like intra-familial conversations, but I mean, I'm just interested. Have you had this kind of conversation with your parents? Because obviously you now have come to a position where you sound quite anti-private school. You were sent to a private school. I mean, it's probably quite wonky to have spoken to them about if VAT were added, what would have happened. But do you know what were their attitudes? What were their explanation for sending you to a private school?
I guess the explanation, and I think a lot of, I know lots of people from my background, Black British people who went to private schools. The explanation was, we want to set you up in the best possible way we can for a good life. And we know that you as a Black man will face particular barriers in life. So we want to give you the best quality of education. Education is viewed by West African families, by Caribbean families, as an important vehicle for social mobility. So for me, it was, I didn't have a choice. It wasn't like I was shouting as a 13-year-old, yeah, I want to go to private school. Please send me to private school. It's more, my parents explained it to me as being really important for social mobility, and I understood what they were saying. I understood that private schools were this kind of prestigious place where people who have loads of money send their kids, and their kids receive a high quality of education. They get involved in some extracurricular activities as well, and I understand. I have enjoyed the benefits of that education and of that background. But again, it goes back to my point. I think it's just important that we think about the bigger picture here, and the bigger picture here is that you shouldn't have access to a high quality education based on your background. I think we shouldn't live in a society where people come from less privileged backgrounds and all of a sudden have to settle for a lesser quality of education. I think a good quality of education, an exceptional quality of education, should be available for all. And what the teacher strikes have really revealed to us is that there are real problems in teaching and education, in state education. And it's important that the government, I don't think they will, of course, but maybe the Labour Party might, it's important that whoever forms the next government or this government really do take a look at state education and try and look at ways in which we can improve education for all in this country.
So just to clarify why that conversation was happening on LBC this weekend, Labour made their VAT announcement a long time ago. They keep touting it as how they're going to pay for various things. That conversation this weekend was prompted by a survey by the Independent Schools Council, who they surveyed a bunch of parents and found that almost 60% of them said they certainly or probably would withdraw their child from their current private school if that was added to their fees. I should say, I think that probably is quite loosely defined, because when you go down into the data, it's a much smaller proportion of that who say they actually would. I think, obviously, if you say, would you be more likely to move your kid out of school if VAT was added? Obviously, you're going to say yes. Would actually that many people leave? It's unsure. Despite this attack, though, from Labour, obviously, as you heard in that interview, that head teacher was feeling very hard done by. Private school kids do not have a tough time in Britain. So as Mike was just suggesting there, they are overrepresented in a lot of professions. So despite representing only 7% of the population, they get a lot of the best jobs. Now, these are the results of a 2019 study by the Sutton Trust of senior judges. 65% went to private school, so that's compared to 7% of the population. Civil service permanent secretaries, it's 59. Members of the House of Lords, it's 57. Diplomats, it's 52. Newspaper columnists, it's 44, which might explain a lot. Top actors is 44, which is interesting. England men's cricket team is 43, cabinet members 39, this is percent. Male international rugby players 37%, pop stars 30%, so pop stars overrepresented as well. And male international footballers 5%. So the only group there who are underrepresented. Mike, I suppose, sort of very briefly on this question, you're a black guy who went to private school. So on one level, you're underrepresented in institutions like academia where you currently work. On another level, you're probably overrepresented in institutions where you work like academia. I mean, how do you navigate that? Or you just think that we can't really think too much about our own personal characteristics when it comes to the jobs we get?
It's an interesting one. Again, I am conscious of my privilege. I'm conscious that because I attended a private school, I'm in a position I am today. And it's something that, A, I'm grateful for, but B, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's just that because I attended a private school and I received the level of education I did and I had exposure to particular things in terms of social, extracurricular activities, it means I have access to, particular universities, and when I was able to do a PhD, all of those things. So I actually think what we need to do in Britain is focus on making this a fairer and more equitable society. It shouldn't be fair that, media is dominated by people who attended particular private schools or even professions like acting are dominated by people and academia as well. I'm fully aware of academia is dominated by people who attended private schools. So I think for me, and I've become quite passionate and a vocal critic of private schools myself, having attended one, is that we need to do a better job of making education fairer for all and better for all. That's the focus for me.